Hi there and welcome. Today I'm not going to share my own thoughts with you, but instead draw your attention to some revelations from the committed, uncompromising and superb investigative work on Miss Letby's case by Private Eye magazine. I only stumbled across this treasure trove on everything wrong about Miss Letby's prosecution and conviction on Wednesday while researching the strange thing that I keep coming across in the Tattle Life case reports of these periodic live reporting blackouts. Anyway, Private Eye is obviously well known, but is pretty niche here in the 21st century. I first assumed that the dynamite stuff I was reading was common knowledge, but then thought to double check by looking at the magazine's circulation. Turns out that in its 64-year history now coming up, founded in 1961, it's never been above 300,000, and the most recent figures, 2023, have it down at a minuscule 233,000. So it just makes sense to share it just seems a good idea on that basis to spread the information that I learned there more widely as best I can, if only to people who don't get to see Private Eye. So the special report I found, it is a so far 11-part special report by a Dr. Phil Hammond, going by the alias MD. Now, along with an evident editorial fearlessness and the fact of it being an ongoing campaign, the unique selling point is the effective manner in which MD has leveraged the network established over apparently 32 years of medical practice. He's been able to run some of the big medical and clinical questions of the case past a currently practicing neonatologist with a national reputation, and is even on good enough terms with one of the consultants at the Countess of Chester to have had an email discussion with him, quite an extended one from the sounds of things, about the case. Dewey Evans communicates his naked prejudices and clinical insanities to him with great enthusiasm even, although tellingly, the other 5 prosecution experts, being not quite so brass-necked as Evans, chose not to return his emails. Across the 11 articles, I have identified about 20 pieces of information which are either news for me and presumably for many of you too, or kind of previously slipped under the radar in terms of their significance, with an eye on how online resources which don't go with the main serial killer narrative tend to often mysteriously disappear, never to be seen again. I will be quoting quite extensively, and on occasion will find it necessary to make comment. Accordingly, to try to cover all that I think of value in across those 11 to 3-page articles in a single video is a non-starter, so this is going to be a 2-parter. So the first major revelation is that Private Eye was actually set to begin publication of this special report back in September of 2023, but was gagged. I quote, "Post-publication, I was then contacted by a number of experts who believe the science and statistics presented at the trial were incomplete and flawed, and that the case against Letby was not proven beyond reasonable doubt. The Eye was set to publish these views last September, but was prevented from doing so by a court order which we unsuccessfully challenged." The publication referred to is a piece which MD himself did on the in the issue of Private Eye of the 25th of August of 2023. It's a fortnightly magazine, so this is the first one that came out after the verdicts. And I haven't read it, but he seems to imply that his position in it was consistent with the mainstream narrative. So, as he says, he does not say who actually gagged the magazine, but I think we can be certain that this was the initial impetus for the revival of one of the 6 undecided cases for retrial. You see, a prospective retrial was the only possible legal basis for the gag, or for such a gag, and that this was indeed the basis on which the authorities got their gag is confirmed by the fact that Private Eye was finally able to begin publishing MD's special reports in July of this year, July of 2024, immediately after the end of that retrial. That's 10 months later than those grave concerns by the scientific and medical community over the convictions would have otherwise been brought to the public's attention. It is never more evident that this case never ever had anything to do with justice if, even in the first flush of victory, their priority was excluding expert challenge of the science. Moving on, it transpires that back in 2017, the calling into hospital of the police was actually contrary to expert legal advice which the trust had sought on the question, but subsequently kept quiet about, along with so much else, much of which no doubt still is quiet. Anyway, I quote, "The trust even hired a barrister to interview staff at the unit, and in April 2017, Simon Medland QC told the Countess of Chester board he could see, I quote, no evidence of a crime," end quote. For me, while this corroborates that the consultant's team was agitating for police involvement, though we know from their own words that they were motivated in this only by shameful prejudice, this piece of information just adds further fuel to the fire that the ultimate decision to formally initiate a police investigation was a cynical stratagem to deflect the impending clinical negligence claims. The Daily Mail covered both these developments at the hospital in the same report on May the 18th of 2017. There may, however, have been an even higher level of deceit and strategizing going on though, because MD also supplies a quote from a senior police officer, apparently from the same period, which makes it clear that after their initial assessment, the position of the leadership of Cheshire Constabulary was that there was no cause for police action. Again, I quote, "Notes of the Trust's meeting with senior police quoted Assistant Chief Constable Darren Martland saying, 'There is nothing in the reviews as a non-clinical expert as to the direct allegation or suggestion of significant negligence or act that could constitute as a criminal act. Also, there is no specific allegation at this point to suggest a criminal act. We do not have any reasonable grounds to suspect or believe this may have been the case," end quote. That is a pretty unambiguous statement that the spike in deaths at the unit had been assessed to be not police business, whether from the perspective of corporate negligence or a straight criminal act perspective. Annoyingly, MD doesn't say whether that meeting preceded or followed the consultation with the barrister. Reasonably, You would guess that it came afterwards, because you generally go up the food chain in such inquiries, and the top brass of the local police force is as high as it gets from the perspective of trust, at least. Having dismissed the idea of launching a police investigation sometime between April and May of 2017, why would the leadership of Cheshire Constabulary do an abrupt U-turn on the question, involving doubtless the commitment of a massive amount of their budget a matter of weeks, if not days later? Were they ordered to do so? Who, if anyone, has the power to direct chief police officers in this way? Association of Chief Police Officer level police leaders are responsive to the local council or mayor, depending on which runs the show in their area, in terms of broad strategy set annually, but cannot be directed by either on a day-to-day operational basis. There are no formal constraints on the discretion of British chief police officers to choose how they go about their business of fighting crime. There are, however, informal ones, the most obvious being, corruption, leaving them beholden to criminals or businessmen and therefore responsive to the needs of those persons. Oh, that's obviously a very rare thing. I'm not suggesting it goes on anywhere, but it's obviously happened in the past here. It's happening now in other parts of the world without doubt. It could even be happening here too, but let's not go there. The other is the state as it is represented by the government of the day, or the career bureaucrats who are nominally only the advisors of elected ministers, but in practice actually run the show. That was revealed by the most powerful unelected person in government in recent memory, Dominic Cummings. A useful analogy for the relationship between ministers and the civil servants in their departments, the top ones anyway, is that of the difference in local knowledge between tourists and local residents. There is also the added disadvantage for ministers that, in the real world, tourists at least tend to have the financial power, whereas for ministers in their tour of a ministry, because that's all, it can be a short thing, it's never longer than 4 years, and if they're any good or bad, it can be as just a few months. They can spend as little time as just a few months in post at a particular ministry, well, they don't even have that advantage, because the question of where the money goes is likely to be where they are most like babes in the woods in their dealings with a permanent secretariat. I turn now from newly disclosed facts to something MD points up which has been hiding in plain sight. He makes the, with hindsight, blindingly obvious point that they, being police and the CPS, knew that Miss Letby didn't harm anyone. You know why? I quote, "In an extensive search of Letby's internet history, there was no evidence she'd researched any of these methods." With this, that profoundly disturbing question I raised in my last video once again rears its ugly head. The absence from Miss Letby's internet search history of any searches even tenuously related to the 9 alleged methods of attack represents the lowest hanging of low-hanging fruit for the defense. With the reliance on parent searches by the prosecution, this fact had to have occurred to them. I mean, while I can say that it hasn't been reported anywhere that the defense put this to the jury, to my knowledge, I can't say with certainty that it didn't do it. because I haven't got to spare £100,000 to pay for a transcript. Not that the transcript includes everything anyway, so it wouldn't cover this question as a matter of certainty, but most probably not, in fact. But I think it's pretty certain. I mean, look, even on the Science on Trial project, Sir Richard Adams was incredibly well informed about the case. There were other people there who were almost as informed, and I don't have any recollection of anyone mentioning the jury having this put to them by the defense. So I'm quite confident that it didn't happen. I'm saying I'm quite confident that I can rely on the fact that I haven't come across it having been reported or it being mentioned in comments anywhere of having happened as evidence that the defense did not actually put that really bread and butter fact to the jury. And as such, it would represent an own goal comparable to the agreement before the trial itself that the insulin babies were definitely poisoned, the thing I spoke about so much in my previous video. Further fuel to the same fire is what we learned in summer 2024 about the post-it notes being written on the advice of the hospital's head therapist. Were we only learning about it then because it was a piece of trial information the media had been persuaded to suppress during and immediately after the trial, or because it was information which only came to light in 2024? If the latter, as they say in American boxing circles, the fix is in. It is inconceivable that her legal team did not speak to Miss Letby about the whys and wherefores of the scribblings the prosecution and especially the media were being so triumphant about. It is equally inconceivable that such conversation would not have seen Miss Letby inform her lawyers that she had been in therapy and her therapist, the head of occupational health, had advised her to jot down her thoughts. Yes, every time I think about this, I too ask myself if it was a setup, but let's not go there at this time. Anyway, if the foregoing speculated conversation did not take place, we might as well all give up and go home. As such, the genesis of those post-it notes was both gold dust and low-hanging fruit for Miss Letby's defense. If over 10 months her defense somehow overlooked to communicate this to the jury, what are we to think? On this subject, we also have the incomprehensible failure to make use of the September 2016 RCPCH report, which MD also mentions, I quote, as the damning service review from the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, RCPCH, which the jury never saw. That's the important bit, which the jury never saw. How was that decision ever made by the defense? Again, what are we to think? To turn to the medical side of MD's investigative journalism, as I mentioned, he was able to get the opinion of a nationally prominent neonatologist. This is obviously not as racy as the foregoing, the stuff I've been talking about up to now, but is such an explanatory silver bullet for the frequent oxygen desaturations and occasional cardiac arrests of these tiny, fragile, sickly babies at the extreme edge of viability for life that it is well worth hearing. I quote, MD's senior neonatology source, who did not want to be named, concurs that more natural occurrences are far more plausible than those proposed by the prosecution. He quotes, episodes of apnea and bradycardia, that's the cardiac arrest aspect, are very frequent in preterm babies. If a baby fails to self-correct from an apnoic episode and needs resuscitation, the first thing that's done is to ventilate using a bag and mask. As the mask covers the mouth and nose, the stomach is inevitably distended. This is the likeliest cause for the repeated mentions of gaseous distension of the stomach, in my opinion. In my opinion, the cases all have much more plausible alternative explanations than those alleged. For example, research has found that air embolism is a not infrequent occurrence after cardiopulmonary resuscitation, to which, of course, these infants were substantially subjected. On the basis of what I've seen, this conviction is wholly unsafe. End quote. I'm going to wrap up part 1 with what MD describes as the open goal. I quote, "A lay jury won't have understood all the scientific complexities in the original Letby trial, but they didn't need to because the judge, Mr. Justice Goss, directed them that it was not necessary for the prosecution to prove the precise manner in which she had acted, only that she had acted with murderous intent. 7 consultant pediatricians were certain she had acted with murderous intent, and Dr. Evans was certain he had proved murder with the help of other experts. Not a single expert spoke up for Letby. The only surprise is that the jury didn't convict her on all charges." End quote. To fully grasp the import of this, we have to briefly get into the technicalities of criminal law, namely what constitutes a criminal act. For criminal liability to exist, 2 elements are necessary, and I'm here excluding strict liability things like serving underage people in a pub or drink driving. So, 2 elements, something called an actus reus and something called a mens rea. It's Latin. The actus reus is the guilty act, the thing which is contrary to the law of the land as it stands right now. It contravenes something on the current statute books, that this is something that someone does. That's the guilty act. It can include both actions and failures to act, acts and omissions. The mens rea is the guilty mind or the mental state of the accused at the time of doing that thing, taking that action which is contrary to the law of the land as it stands here and now. This includes the accused's intention and awareness of the risk of their actions. Both actus reus and mens rea are required to establish a criminal act. In introducing them, I said I use the word necessary. They are more than just necessary. They are the foundation of criminal law and are used to determine criminal liability. You need both of them together. They are also essential for ensuring a fair and just legal system. As I said, both of them together, without one without the other, does not make a crime. So, the effect of Goss's statement quoted above is that he unilaterally relaxed the actus reus requirement in Miss Letby's 22 charges, explicitly directing the jurors not to worry too much about satisfying themselves that Miss Letby had done an act contrary to English legislation as far as offences against the person goes, but to simply focus on whether they were satisfied that she was in fact a murderous individual. he artfully misdirected them from the fact that every one of them would have felt murderous on numerous occasions in life, possibly in every day, but none of them, presumably, had ever actually killed anyone. That is equally true of every person walking the face of the earth today, in the sense that everyone will have had the experience of feeling murderous, but only a tiny fraction of a 1% of people ever actually murder anyone in the course of their life. Goss may imply the fig leaf that he was relieving a jury of limited intellectual bandwidth, of the stress of getting to grips with complicated science. He wasn't, and even if he was, it would be wrongful, as it comes with the territory in being on a jury, and moreover, it cannot be at the expense of the person they sit in judgment on. But the greatest impact of this relaxation of the normal requirement for definitive criminal action, as far as I can see, is in the bringing about of convictions against Miss Letby, which jurors would otherwise never have agreed on. The Child K retrial is perhaps the best example of the abuse that Goss flung the door open to, as it was a count which actually involved no science at all, just a straightforward call on whether a nurse physically moved a breathing tube deliberately. Goss's guidance neatly misdirects the jury away from the actual material question it should have been addressing, that of the total absence of any evidence that the nurse moved the tube at all, whether deliberately or otherwise. On the basis of this and other strange decisions, either this man was a rogue judge, or the system itself went rogue, tasking one of its judges to bring about a specified outcome, basically making him nothing more and nothing less than a judicial assassin. I'm not just gratuitously rocking the boat here. Consider the other prompt he gave the retrial jury to precipitate that conviction. He more or less said, in your deliberations, you can take account of the fact that you are considering the actions of a convicted murderer, or words to that effect. He didn't even need to say the next part, which would have been convicted of multiple murders and attempted murders in more or less identical circumstances to what you are looking at. This man now occupies a place next to Dewey Evans in my conscious and subconscious mind. But I don't want to dwell on him. Like Evans, he isn't worth it. What I want to do is just focus on the simple logic behind the statement and the circumstances of it, as that will expose it and him more effectively than 1,000 words of invective. Jury selection being a random thing, so they tell us, theoretically, the same 12 people forming the jury at the original trial could have been brought together for the retrial. Could this man Goss have given them the same instruction that they could factor Miss Letby's being a convicted serial killer into their assessment of her guilt in the retrial? No. Even with the limited intellectual bandwidth which is the life legacy of modern British education, even so brass-necked an individual as Goss could not have expected them to wear it. They, as the ones who had thus labelled Miss Letby while rejecting the Child K count, could not now be asked to rely on their earlier labelling of Miss Letby as a serial killer as evidence to now convict her on the Child K count. Goss would have been openly ridiculed and regarded as incompetent in those circumstances. The point is this: if he would not have been in a position to highlight criminal propensity to the original jury sitting for the retrial, it is the clearest evidence that there was no new criminal propensity to take into account. Miss Letby's criminal propensity profile for the retrial had to be the same as it had been at the time when the child K count was part of a battery which included 21 other charges. If Miss Letby had gone rogue herself in prison and hospitalized or killed a tormentor, that would have been a different story. What Goss did at that retrial was judicial sleight of hand of the most despicable nature. Where was Miss Letby's defense to challenge it? Right, so as I said, this is a two-parter. Part one ends there. Please feel free to share your own thoughts and any information you think might be of interest in the comments section below. As usual, thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. Please look out for part 2, which I hope to do sometime, certainly by next weekend. And as usual, thank you for your time. Thanks for watching, and all the best.